Welcome back to The Explainer. So, today we're tackling a massive, incredibly important question. How do gigantic, highly populated democracies actually share and manage power without completely falling apart? It's a fascinating structural puzzle, and we're going to break it down to really understand the mechanics of how nations govern themselves.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. 1. Understanding federalism. 2. Types of federations. 3. India's federal structure. 4. Federalism in practice. And 5. Decentralization in India.
You know, there's a really common and honestly very valid point of confusion when talking about this stuff. What exactly are we supposed to call the government in a huge country like India? Is it the union government, the federal government, the central government? Trying to figure out who actually holds the reins of power can literally feel like a riddle. Well, stick with me because we're going to solve that riddle together right now. Section 1. Understanding federalism. To really grasp this, we've got to start at the absolute highest level of global political theory.
Now, what's really interesting about the global landscape is the math here. Out of 193 countries in the world, only 25 actually have federal political systems. That sounds pretty small, right? But here's the kicker. The citizens of those 25 countries, they make up 40% of the entire global population. So while federalism might be rare if you're just counting individual countries, it is absolutely the go-to system for the world's biggest, most populated nations.
So, to understand how this actually works, we have to wrap our heads around one central concept: jurisdiction. Basically, jurisdiction is just the area over which someone has legal authority. And that area can be defined by physical, geographical boundaries or by specific subjects. Like who controls the military versus who manages the local schools. In a true federation, different tiers of government govern the exact same citizens, but they get to operate in completely different legal playgrounds.
This brings us to a really crucial comparison: unitary versus federal systems. In a unitary system, power is highly centralized. Any subunits, like provinces or states, are strictly subordinate. The central government can just pass down orders and expect them to be followed, no questions asked. But under a federal system, power is fundamentally divided. State or provincial governments actually have their own independent power. The central government simply cannot just bark orders at the state level. All right, so what are the actual structural pillars that hold the federation together? Well, first, it relies on a dual government, so at least 2 levels of authority. Next up is a strict division of powers, meaning everybody knows their specific job. Then we have constitutional superiority, which just means the rules are written down and they act as the absolute supreme law. Crucially, you also need independent courts to act as the ultimate umpire when disputes inevitably pop up. And finally, it serves dual objectives, safeguarding national unity while at the same time accommodating regional diversity.
Section 2. Types of federations. So, that's the underlying theory, but how do countries actually go about building these complex systems?
It turns out there are 2 distinct ways to build a federation. First, you have coming together federations. This is exactly what it sounds like: independent states willingly uniting to form a larger, stronger entity. Think of the USA, Switzerland, or Australia. The other way is a holding together federation. This brilliantly illustrates what happens when a massive, already existing nation proactively decides to slice up its power to accommodate diverse groups and stop the country from fracturing. India, Spain, and Belgium are classic examples of this holding together model.
Section 3. India's federal structure. With that global context in our back pocket, let's zoom in on our primary case study.
Let's resolve that initial confusion we talked about earlier. When the Indian Constitution was written after an incredibly painful partition, it officially declared India as a union of states. But here is a fascinating little quirk. The Constitution never actually uses the word federation. Not once. However, despite the specific terminology they went with, the entire framework is built fundamentally on federal principles. So, for all intents and purposes, it operates as a federation in everything but name. So, how does India practically divide all that immense power? Well, it leans heavily into the rule of 3, using 3 specific constitutional lists. The Union List is for subjects requiring a uniform national policy, stuff like defense and currency. Only the central government touches these. Then the State List handles local, day-to-day issues like police and agriculture. And finally, the Concurrent List contains shared interests, like education or marriage. Both levels can make laws here, but if there's ever a conflict, the union law acts as the ultimate tiebreaker. Now, you can't just have an informal handshake agreement about this kind of power sharing. It needs to be securely locked in. India safeguards its structure with what's called a rigid constitution. The parliament literally cannot change this arrangement on its own. It requires a 2/3 majority plus ratification by at least half of the state legislatures. And guarding this entire system is an independent judiciary, specifically the Supreme Court and high courts, who are always ready to step in and resolve any jurisdictional clashes.
Section 4. Federalism in practice. Constitutional lists and legal theory are great on paper, but how does this actually survive the chaos of reality?
The absolute first, and arguably the most massive, test for India's democratic politics was the creation of linguistic states. Between 1947 and 2017, the internal map of India was fundamentally redrawn. Old states vanished completely, and boundaries were shifted specifically to ensure that people who spoke the same language shared the same state. It was a huge gamble. They were trying to accommodate diversity to keep the country united rather than just forcing everyone into one uniform mold.
And that brings us to a very important number, 22. So, the crucial point here is that the Indian Constitution explicitly schedules 22 distinct languages. This showcases a truly unique language policy that absolutely refused to impose just one single national language on such a diverse population. While Hindi is the official language for government operations, protecting all these 22 languages is a total hallmark of how a holding together federation actually survives day to day.
Section 5. Decentralization in India. We've gone from global theory to national structure and down to state borders. Now, for our final stage, we're zooming all the way down to the local neighborhood.
So, what exactly do we mean by decentralization? Simply put, it's the process of taking power away from the central and state governments and handing it directly down to local governments. The logic behind this is incredibly straightforward. Local people have the absolute best, most intimate knowledge of their own local problems. They know exactly where a well is needed, and they know exactly how to spend funds most efficiently to solve their immediate issues.
Let's move on and see how this built the modern Indian system. 1992 was a real game changer, a true watershed moment. The Constitution was officially amended to create a powerful, legally backed third tier of government. Power was structurally taken from the top and pushed downward, profoundly empowering local panchayats in the villages and municipalities in the cities. It fundamentally forced a habit of direct democratic participation right at the grassroots level.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty profound question. By shifting power all the way down to the village and municipality level, does true democracy actually rely entirely on local self-government? Can a massive nation only truly survive if its smallest units govern themselves? It's a fascinating structural question to chew on. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, mapping the journey of power from the global stage to the local village. Keep learning and keep questioning how your world is built.